Good evening, dear friends.
Good evening, everyone.
This is the last video of this year.
If it could be possible, we would wish that we didn't live this 2020. Yet, considering what we read in the divine order in the universe, it looks like we will remember 2020 as happy days. Let's first gossip about 2020.
With what we read in the book or with the astrological prophecies for 2020, we talked throughout this year about some troublesome events that will happen. What happened? Suddenly all of us found ourselves within such troublesome events. Probably, none of us expected that this pandemic could affect the whole world so deeply. What was the weight of this virus in total? How many grams?
Only 0.1 milligrams in an infected person. Incredible, eh?
And of course, we ponder upon the meaning of the global message which the divine systems are behind. Yes, there were many conspiracy theories in the air, etc., but still, we must remember that behind all events and appearances in the world, there are governing spiritual systems, and as we started to think about the aim and purpose of this global pandemic and lockdowns, most of us turned within. Within our homes, within our inner world, and with all those so-called free time in our hands, first we emptied our drawers, in both senses. I mean, for many people, this year was beneficial in that regard. Personally, I checked my drawers to see what I accumulated so far inside my drawers or folders of beliefs and thoughts. Of course, facing with all of these was not an easy process, to see clearly all those patterns of behaviors. And this was not the first pandemic. Throughout the written history, there are records of such wide-scale plagues. So, what we found ourselves in was not an unprecedented event. The unprecedented thing was the internet and the social media. As we almost instantly became informed about the latest developments, theories, news etc. has surfaced almost all of our deepest fears. Still, as a person, I benefited from the ideas I read in the divine order and the universe in 2020, especially the knowledge about even the psychological manifestations of us, our matter. And in this reading and commentary series, we try to share this knowledge with you, as much as we can. Yes, in Istanbul you and our friends in the Bilyay Foundation, our friends in MISRS Spiritual Research Society and us in Adana worked hard to make this year active with our online lectures and videos. What do you want to say about 2020?
Well, for every new year, the wishes are health, happiness, joy etc., but this year these didn't come true. I live in Adana and during the most beautiful seasons of this city, we were locked ourselves in our homes. We could smell the flowers of the tangerine trees from our ajar windows. But I will not complain, during the Spanish flu, people were dying like flies. Yes, many people died in this pandemic as well, but for the rest of us, our biggest complaint or concern was the disruption of our comforts. And we mandatorily practiced turning within. In short, even for the ones who say, nothing happens to me, something happened, if not an infection, then the stress and tension of those months. Still, we learnt and experienced so many new things, about ourselves, about how the world is really a small global village where a disruption affects the rest of it. For us, the most useful result was the increase in using online connections with people. We have been talking about this for the last 5 years, but, you know, there is a saying that, God has no stick. We say this when we want to make fun of someone living the consequences of his or her bad choices, meaning, God has his own way of punishing. Yet, God has a virus, we saw that. The silver lining here was the widening of our reach to people. And this is much more interactive. When we asked a question, 2 weeks ago, there were so many comments and I felt so happy. And the questions they ask are so good. Some of these questions fire up new neuron connections in our brains. I really thank our friends and their brains for their participation and contribution. And this evening, we will try to answer their questions.
Yes, there is a question about the topic we just talked about. I couldn't find any mention about a disaster like COVID-19 in the divine order and the universe, or maybe I missed it. Of course, COVID is not specifically mentioned in the book. However, the book mentions that towards the end of world cycle, the illnesses and pandemics and all other natural disasters will increase.
For the previous world cycle, the book says, some diseases had emerged for which mankind did not know the reason.
In the third part of the book.
Yes, we still don't know if COVID pandemic's cause was natural or man-made. Nevertheless, it is not necessary that we will find the literal events of our daily lives in this book. Our friend doesn't mean this, but sometimes people want to find that kinds of one-on-one overlapping. This book explains the process of the development of such events and how far this process can go. And if our friends assume that we survived this pandemic without a scratch, please know that many of our close friends and relatives died because of COVID. Well, even today I learnt about another relative's passing away. My parents died because of COVID. And I see that many friends write in the chat box about their loved ones passed away this year. But I also read some emotional sentences, so let me tell you this. We shouldn't analyze a death by saying, had this be done, had that medicine was found, that person could survive, etc., etc. I must tell you that we must give up this habit of looking for others to blame when we lose a loved one. Because we read in the divine order in the universe that if a start needs to be given in a chain of events, let's say clearly, if a person needs to die, that is, if a person needs to pass to the spatium, changes can be made in the brain cells of the people that will be involved in the events leading to this death. That person can be led to make a mistake. A doctor can be led to make a mistake. An offspring can be led to make a mistake. And within a chain of reactions, that person is led to the result of leaving his or her body. Therefore, instead of reacting to such an event with those kinds of assumptions and emotional speculations, it is better trying to understand how this chain of events has been chosen, its deterministic structure, the causality, the cause and effect system. And I suggest you to read the divine order and the universe's pages on the plan of destiny and how this plan uses the mechanism of time. Of course, this is a method of the original principle, and after reading and understanding those passages, things will begin to get clearer. I hope that our friends notice that I talked neither in a reassuring way nor in a blaming way. It is always better to look at events in a realistic way.
A friend says that their patient was sent to home from the hospital and died at home. And for the last 2 months, this question was haunting them: had our patient stayed at the hospital, would he survive? Is there a time and date of death? When a human is born to this world, she or he comes with a life plan, and in order to realize this life plan, his being and all beings in duty in the organization around this life plan help that human being. Yes, sometimes we see that how and when we die is already outlined in that life plan. However, in this book, on the passages about the average number, that is, 500 or 700 incarnations of a human being, there are these sentences. As a matter of fact, although even one life of man is regulated and planned, it is not possible to express the duration of it with certainty because of the imperatives of destiny. Again, for the same reasons, it is impossible to presuppose which developmental stages mankind will reach at what time as they apply their plans. For, this impossibility is caused by the ever-changeability of the results of that being's efforts, as a consequence of some freedoms recognized to him, which will be appreciated by the plan of destiny. And just yesterday, a death happened in our family. A cousin from my mother's side was hospitalized for a spleen operation. Operation was successful. He was not infected with the virus, but a few hours after he was released from the hospital, he had an heart attack and died. So, if a human being has a destined life plan and the time and the way of death for that person is somehow determined, then this will happen. Most of the pain and sorrow we feel after a loved one's death is actually the survival's guilt. Could we do more or something else to prevent this death? A friend of mine who is a medical doctor also had this feeling of guilt because after waiting 3 days on the bedside of her sick father, she thought that everything is fine and I can take a break. She goes home to take a shower and then gets the news of her father's death. She meditated on this feeling and an intuition came to her in a vision of her father, saying, you were holding me down so strongly that I couldn't leave my body when you were around.
This is very important.
Only when his daughter was away, this man could say, "Oh, now I can go." And my friend understood after this experience that she was the one who didn't let her father to pass away. We also see this not letting go issue in cases of bedridden patients that are barely alive for a long time. Normally, for the being it is easy to withdraw its projection from the body, because the being is not within the body. And the moment this projection or concentration of the being's influence ceases, death happens, but there may be many factors prolonging this transition. Yes, in short, we can say that each human being's death process is all about his or her life plan, and no matter what you do, what that needs to occur will occur.
As we talk about this topic, there was a question emailed to us, from Ms. Yeshim: what is the situation of our being regarding illnesses? I'd like to answer this question. Now, dear friends, each of us has a being. We established it firmly in our minds, didn't we? After a certain level of development, as a spirit's capacity for engagement with matter increased, that spirit gathered, organized and formed a high-level matter at the border of the semi-subtle matter, builds up a being. And spirit continues to develop its being in an almost infinite process, and the bodies they build up together from plant cells to plants, then animal cells to animals, then human body cells, especially brain cells to human beings. As much as that being's application and experience in matter. Let's make this clear, as well. So, the being's level of development is very important because that level will allow the being's level of interaction with the matter of its body and also other bodies in its vicinity. Now, let's only focus on the illnesses of human beings. Yes, human body is a very complex organism, and human brain is much more complex. Still, the being's level of development will influence this body's level of interaction, that is, transmitting and receiving the influences. Now, in the Stone Age, a human body's main aim is survival. The average lifetime is short and his brain is mostly occupied with coarse influences and tries hard to adapt the conditions of that times. If you wonder what is the difference between coarse influences and finer influences, just remember a time you felt heartbroken or sad because of a friend's words or acts. That feeling or the moment of trauma is a finer influence compared to the automatic needs of a caveman. Yes, even though finer, these are still matter. So, as we begin to act on automatic or instinctual needs such as survival, copulation etc., we get developed in time, by making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. In other words, the spiritual system allows our beings, and consequently, us human beings to make those mistakes by opening fields of choices. And as our being gets develops, the choices to make become finer, subtler, and this is how the being begins to comprehend, that is, to understand the consequences of the choices. This increase in comprehension leads to the more development in matter of the human brain. Then as human beings we start to think, to deduce, to intuit more and more as this two-sided development increase. And all the choices the being and the human body it is connected to made throughout this process lead to some mistakes, of course, and some of these mistakes appear sometimes as illnesses, sometimes as cruelty, and sometimes a wrong choice leads to death. Let's say, a human makes a wrong choice and a war is lost as a consequence and thousands of people die. Just think of World War II. Not only a person's but a whole nation's wrong choices resulted in destruction of lives. However, did the world end as a punishment? No, in this immense system, there is no punishment but opportunities to see the consequences of our personal or communal choices, that is, a possibility to comprehend. Yes, very hard and painful way to comprehend, but this is the law of causality. Of course, if a person or a community comprehends, there is no one to pat their shoulders or give golden medals, saying, "You did a good job, now you can rest." No, with this increased comprehension, they need to continue living in these conditions, but now, they have a possibility to make better choices. And what I mention is also valid for a body's illnesses, as well. Let me repeat, a being's level of development is in parallel with that being's capacity for utilizing influences. A less developed being works with cruder influences. A more developed being works with finer influences, within organizations of finer matter, and they make less mistakes in exchanging influences. It doesn't mean that they never get ill or die. It will certainly happen. Yet, as a being learns more about exchange of finer influences, its body will be much healthier, less prone to illnesses. In short, this is about using our energies in better ways.
And in the divine order and the universe, the cancerization is mentioned many times. As the cause of cancer, the book says that possibilities of matter become insufficient to meet the needs of the body and the being, and also, incomplete connections due to the disruptions or degenerations between the influence centers. In short, the disconnection of the influence flux between us and our being. And what is illness? We know that there is a constant flux of information going on between our organs, nervous system, veins, blood flow and hormones. Also, we have meridian lines. If some blockage happens at some point of this flux, illness occurs. This is the biological side of the equation. There are also the impressions reflected to us and impressions we reflect to our vicinity. If I cannot understand, see, and observe things related to my being, and if I keep on making the same choices over and over, let's say becoming stuck with the same thoughts, feelings, emotions which don't help me to develop, then this connection is blocked. And many researchers now says that our thoughts, emotions and feelings are at the roots of our many illnesses, even cancer cases. It is obvious that when we are stuck with the same cycles of actions, behaviors, emotions and feelings, when we cannot change these patterns in our lives, when we cannot receive the messages coming from the events in our lives, this blockage manifests as illnesses in our bodies. Because the book talks about the cancer cases from two angles, that is, from the material structure of the human body and also the wholeness of the being as an ensemble of influences and energies, then such illnesses do not happen arbitrarily because the being organizes the body in accordance of the needs of the spirit. And also, some neurological research results point to the fact that the foundation for some illnesses, like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's or diabetes, is established in the mother's womb, and this may means that while the being forming the cells and organs of the fetus in the womb, it sends influences related to future tests and trials or experiences in accordance with the life plan outlined for the baby to be born. Yet, on the other hand, if diabetes or high blood pressure etc. run in our family, it is obvious that I have a genetic tendency for such illnesses. But with awareness and by changing our lifestyle habits, we can lessen this tendency, and it is our responsibility. Not only by becoming more aware about the foods, exercise, but also by observing and mastering our mood swings, emotions, etc. So, nothing is written in stone, we can change things for better. Bilgehan, let's first answer the questions sent to us beforehand. If time permits, we can continue with the new ones coming in. A question from Ms. Chidem: you had mentioned that as the spirit evolves, matter develops. And as the matter develops, the capacity and organizational complexity of the body a being can adapt to. The body mentioned here is the material form of the spiritual being? Or the material body the human being uses? Or both? What I understand and feel is that spiritual evolution develops not only the form of the spiritual being but all bodily forms up until the coarse humanoid form. My other question connected to this is it possible to observe this process of development in the material human bodies within a period of time, by our worldly understanding of time, within a lifetime? Or what meant here is a development not for a single human being but a development that will be realized within a period of ages for the material bodies the humankind uses in general?
Well, first let me thank our friends for these good questions. This friend obviously was thinking as she wrote this question, and by asking, is it both, she answered her own question. Yes, both. These two, that is, on the one hand, the spirit's evolution, and on the other hand, development of matter, which also means development of the being and the body, go in tandem. Development of the being means the increase of its capacity for engaging with more complex influences, hence, with more complex matter. As a result of this, it also means the widening of its comprehension and by this, its ability of widening the fields on which it can receive more influences. And this means that the being gets more developed and is engaged with more possibilities of matter. Now, let's bring it down to matter in our universe, the hydrogen realm, to our world. Because this development in the being it can be concentrated on more complex bodies. In our case, it does not mean a human form with 2 hearts or 5 arms, of course. That complex body is still human body, but now it can deal with much finer states of matter. For example, it begins to observe and feel what the altruism means. Or love means. That human begins to live through events that bring opportunities for experiencing such states in many degrees. Let's say, that human being becomes a healer, begins to tell other people about the things she or he experience and learns. Or becomes an inventor, thinker, scientist, artist etc., always working on much finer degrees of such states. But it does not mean that human knows and memorizes all chemical and physics equations etc. Certainly not. All of these are the expressions in human language. The elevated and subtler levels of human understanding become the essential knowledge of the being and furthers its development up to point where the being becomes capable of forming a body in the semi-subtle realm, always in accordance with its comprehension, with its development. And in the much further stages of this development, our beings will not even need forming bodies because they will be a part of the unity of comprehensions, that is, the unitary. In short, whatever was important in the previous levels of development becomes irrelevant in the further levels of development, engaging with the increasingly finer and subtler influences, and eventually becoming one with that universal harmony becomes the aim.
I'd like to add a few things to your words. Now, we know that spirit and matter are not within each other and they are not in direct contact. The book described the spirit as the superuniverse truths. The communication between spirit and matter is indirect, via influences. And as we discussed last week, amorphous matter cannot move by itself, and only by the influences coming from the original principle, the motion begins in matter. Later, spirit goes through a passive adaptations phase among matter, which is termed as a dark stage. As spirits connect to an atom, that is, matter, they learn governing matter and develop matter by executing formations, deformations, by gathering and dispersing matter. Until the stage of being's emergence in matter, there is an initial hydrogen atom. And by the gradual development of this hydrogen atom, the more developed hydrogen atom occur, which is the substance of our hydrogen realm and hence, the being. Hence, manifestations and further development of matter. Starting from the emergence of first atom from the amorphous matter, then emergence of our hydrogen realm, and beings going through all those infinitely long stages, atom, plant, animal and human, towards further stages, the plan of love, plan of duty and the unitary. So, spirit via the being develops the bodies, that is, increasingly more complex organizations of matter. But, please no mistake, what organizes the bodies is the being, not the spirit. And the being by projecting its influences into bodies, in our case, into the fetus in the womb etc. And all those experiences those bodies acquire becomes the essence knowledge in the being, and the being reflects this essence knowledge to its spirit. And if you remember, at the pages we read so far in this series, there are sentences like, when the spirit withdraws from the universe, matter reverts to its amorphous state. And many of our friends got worried, saying what will happen to us then? Yes, when form is no more, what remains is the experience and knowledge acquired through that body. And development of matter and the evolution of spirits advance by this. Now, to the topic of illness. In this hydrogen realm, these bodies we have become insufficient because the capacity of our beings requires a higher level of matter, a higher vibrational matter, and that's why the cancer cases are increasing. Yes, disruptions occur in our cells, but it is not because of the low level of our beings. It is because its capacity is increased. And in the book, we read that this had happened in the period of Mu. So, we understand that, in the cycles of the world, when this form becomes insufficient for our beings, then disruptions, degenerations occur in these bodies. When the being says that's it, this body is not sufficient anymore, and only then it can leave this form, and only then it can leap towards a higher vibrational matter. And this is why the pressure of the influences increase, and we observe its results in the illnesses of our bodies.
What I see after reading the questions coming from our friends, there is an inner fear underlining their questions. What will happen to us when the spirit withdraws from the universe? Even the book states that such a question may arise in our minds, but also emphasizes that comprehension and knowledge gleaned from all those experiences in the bodies will be spirit's own knowledge. Okay, we think that we are only these bodies. That's our problem. My guess is this concern will end when we developed enough to pass to the plan of duty. Yes, there was a following question: is it possible to observe this process of development in the material human bodies within a period of time, by our worldly understanding of time, within a lifetime? Or what meant here is a development not for a single human being but a development that will be realized within a period of ages for the material bodies the humankind uses in general. Well, we didn't read the parts of the book about the mechanism of time yet, but for the friends who already read the book, my reply will be much clearer. The way our being gleans knowledge from the bodies it builds up, let's say via 500 or 700 incarnations, is obviously much greater than the knowledge we can glean within a single lifetime. In our human bodies and on the world, we are bound by the superficial time, so for an individual human incarnation, a lifetime starts with the birth and ends with death. I mean, if we could experience all concerns and tests and trials of a body lives through a word cycle, which the book states that it lasts around 70,000 years, then we could gather more knowledge. However, book also states that, within a world cycle of 70,000 years long, a being can build a body 500 to 700 times so it can glean the knowledge from the experiences to be lived by those incarnations throughout a world cycle. And all those incarnations of a being, when seen from the perspective of the spherical time or the perceptual time, they are like a cycle of sleeping-waking for 500 to 700 times. Let's say, from that perspective, all incarnations are seen like a single lifetime of a human being. There are many expressions in the religious books pointing to this. Yes, from the perspective of the spherical time, all those incarnations are like a single incarnation. Moreover, this is also seen like a fleeting moment, a dot, a speck from the perspective of the original time running through the universe. So, I suggest that if we take the development of the being in this way, from the much larger, almost infinitely vast perspective, we can understand it better. Even what we experienced 2 days before makes us more experienced. Imagine the scope of all those experiences we had in our past lives.
There is a sequence of developmental stages we went through as beings. And similarly, we see a sequence of developmental stages we went through since our birth in this lifetime. But the point is, the most important lifetime is our current lifetime. We need to know this. Because, with our current level of comprehension and awareness, we as human beings now appear at the tip of an immense cone of influences branching down and up, and what brought us to this point is a vast history of our past which had been lived in bodies formed according to the needs of our beings. We need to understand and appreciate this long journey of lifetimes by living our current lives, by striving for more comprehension and awareness. Alright, now I noticed another question. You said that illness start at the womb. Is it also valid for the mental disabilities? Is this for the development of the mother or the child's? We cannot say such disabilities occur arbitrarily, but still, there may be too many factors leading this: developmental needs of the being, developmental needs of the parents, consequences of their choices, the need for improvement of the more caring and encompassing solutions for such children, some unfinished business from the past lives, etc. The list is almost endless. In short, there may be numerous needs of the being and the other beings to be met with such an illness or disability. A child is born into a family, into a community. So, there must be many tests and trials to be go through for all the beings and persons involved. Let's say, a child is born autistic and that child's main need is to be loved no matter which troubles the parents go through while raising that child. It is also tests and trials for the rest of the extended family, as well as for the larger community. Finding better ways of raising and educating those children, creating proper environments, schools, etc., becomes the test and trials of more persons, not only the close family members. But in such cases, the hardest tests and trials are for the parents, it is obvious. Or consider the deaths of children. When seen from our perspective, it seems so unfair, but from the perspective of the being, concepts like fair or unfair don't exist. For the being, all such appearances are experiences. And yes, duality prevails in this matter universe, and of course, in the world. And in this system of duality, we learn only by experiencing the opposites. Sometimes we learn loving by the absence of love, we value life by the existence of death. And most importantly, our conscience gets developed by using our power of choosing in both opposites and then, by living the consequences of our choices. And we read in the book that the being gets developed by conscientious choices, choosing between earthly cravings and duty. Yes, learning by choosing the selfish options, earthly cravings is also valid, but then, one needs to live the consequences of such choices as suffering. Yet, as you said, when we increase our vibrational level, let's say the level of our compassion, making it more encompassing, then the degree or duration or quality of our suffering change as we become more altruistic.
Yes, we encounter many interesting cases in the past life regression therapy regarding the deaths of children acted as a trigger for the conscientious development of a larger community. There are many examples we encounter.
Yes, as you mentioned, sometimes deaths of the children is not only for the development of their own beings or their close family but also to initiate pangs of conscience of a much larger population. For example, most people, until they saw the photograph of that small Syrian toddler's dead body on the beach, maybe they never truly felt the troubles of all those people trying to run away from the hardships of a civil war. When they saw that photograph, they experienced so many feelings and emotions, and consequently became a little bit more aware of the conditions. And this was a communal wave of awareness. Of course, we can only say that he was drowned when the refugee boat was capsized, but we cannot know the real reasons or needs of this baby's beings choosing this way of death. Still, we can observe that his death was not in vain. High death rendered a function in regard the mankind's conscience.
So far, as we talk about deaths or illnesses of children, we answered many questions coming from many friends.
There is another question here. In the realization of the life plan, do the spiritual plans intervene a lot? Or does the life plan become realized as we live it? We mentioned a few things about the life plan, but here, maybe the degree of intervention needs some clarity. First, when we talk about the exchange of influences between spirit, being in our body, it always goes on. However, such an intervention may happen if the realization of a life plan is very necessary for the life plans of other beings' further development, yet if a life plan may not be realized 100%. Let's say a human being can't spend the necessary effort for going through some test and trials in life, or diverts from the path outlined in his life plan, and in some cases, commits suicide, etc. Please remember that is not a system of punishment. In such cases, the whole chains of cause and effect gets rearranged accordingly, and this is the intervention of the beings with duty. In the book we read that even the time of death can be changed according to the chain of events we affected by our choices and actions.
Here, I see many questions about a topic. We discussed this topic many times in our previous videos, but here, it may be good to repeat again. The topic is the freedom of choice. Not a topic of discussion only for today but for many ages. Of course, we cannot solve it for good this evening, but I can repeat a few things I know, and these can be useful clues for all of us. Humans are able to make choices and to take the responsibility of their choices. Yet, compared to humans, plants almost never can make choices because in the sequence of the development, it is in the quare one, it is in almost complete automation. Compared to plants, animals are governed by instincts, and they can learn to make some slight choices as a result of some suffering from certain insistences. Not always make choices or not always make the right choice, but still animals can make some choices. Of course, there are levels of difference among animals. You cannot train a sheep to give her trotter or forelimb. But you can train a dog to give a high five. Cats are harder to train. In accordance of their levels of learnability, even if by force, some animals can make choices. Okay, let's talk about how freedom of choosing begin for the humans. When a being is reached the stage of human, that being first needs to spend a period in a semi-subtle realm. This is a realm where the power of imagination makes easier to form matter organizations out of the subtler matter energies. Yet, that being who is in a perceptual point in the universe needs to concentrate or projects the 7/8 of its energy to the human form. That is, it incarnates into a human form according to its needs for development. And even though this human form is much more developed and complex compared to plant and animal bodies, it is still in a lower vibrational level than that semi-subtle realm. You can see the correlations between the story of Aden in the religious books. Yet, the being now has freedom of choice. Its further development with this body requires making choices and living the consequences of these choices, and by this, learning more and more. Gradually, from one incarnation to another, the knowledge the being gleaned from all those experiences widens the comprehension. In short, we humans, as we get developed energetically, biologically, psychologically by meditations, reflecting upon our acts, thoughts and emotions, that is, by self-knowledge, then, we get more chances of making choices, and therefore, we become more able to take further responsibilities in accordance with the choices we previously made, and gradually, and always with the help of the influences coming from our being and the beings in duty, we become more able to draw the paths we will follow as a result of this widened freedom. We become more engaged with finer and subtler influences. At some point, we even become able not only making the best choice in the face of the events in our lives but also, making choices to shape and form the near and far future events we will encounter. As we do this, it becomes such a normal part of our lives, we don't even need to stop and think about what to choose because we become more and more aware that, the events we encounter is our own doing. At that point, our development allows us an agency and empowerment with which we can give a direction to or to manifest the variations of events in our lives. This state is almost similar to the state of our being in the semi-subtle realm before it concentrated its energy to the human form for the first time. So, if the simile is apt, we as human beings gradually start to open the door to the energies of the semi-subtle realm because by then, the finer energies we are engaged with are in more tune and in harmony with higher vibrational levels of matter. And how do we do this? By our power of imagination. And this is a rehearsal for the next stage we will pass into. I think, what I said so far is also a reply to that question about if the degree of development can be seen within a lifetime of a human being. Well, if a person becomes able to do this, then it means, that person is developed. And in the spiritual side, that person is evolved, as well. Because in that state, as a person becomes more able to master finer or more subtle matters, she or he understands and knows more about her or his own destiny, and in that state, egoistical wishes and desires cannot be continued. Such earthly cravings become increasingly irrelevant at the higher levels of development.
One of our friends who is also a member of our society sent a question: is the evolutionary capacity of a professor and an uneducated person or a bee and a dolphin equivalent? Well, we all have personal and worldly identities as human beings. What is valuable in the world terms, let's say intelligence and high education, doesn't point a high level of development in the spiritual terms. Someone can be an intelligent scientist, but maybe not a conscientious person. In the spiritual terms, our development in empathy, conscience is more important. And if we increased such values, then we begin to use this for the rest of the humankind as an added value. Yes, a person may be uneducated, but with his or her approach to one's being, to oneself, to nature, to family, to one's body, to humanity in general may be in a very developed state. To the bees and dolphins. We know that their nervous system or experience are different, but we still cannot say one is below and the other is above, because they contribute to the development in different ways. The dolphins act, hunt as a group, they display some behavior akin to humans. And the bees act and work within a magnificent organization to form the honeycombs, to feed the larvae, etc. Instead of assigning lower and upper levels in regard to development for animals and for humans based on our limited perceptions, it is better to think that each and all contribute to their beings by getting experienced and developed, and consequently their beings get developed. There is a question about the Persian mystic Mansur al-Hallaj. He is persecuted for saying, "I am the truth, Ana Alak." Well, we can only say here that what he meant by these words were I saw the truth of matter, I felt the wholeness. He didn't mean I am God. You had mentioned about him and the depth of the states he could go in as a Sufi mystic in our 11th video, I think. And again, it seems that his persecution and death was not in vain, because now, in 2020, it will be 2021 soon, we still talk, ask and discuss about his words. Yes, he said I am the truth, but we should not consider that he said I am God. And in the divine order and the universe, we read, you, who can be you with matter and nothing with everything, and can adapt to the harmony of this everything, long for the moment when you will be of that harmony. And another important point to remember, the book tells us, the states you consider the most spiritual are only matter. So, what we can do most with our brains is to experience a state we can attain by imagination and meditation and to become aware of a figment of that harmony.
Because Mansur al-Hallaj was a Sufi mystic and thinker of his time, such states were his way of reaching higher vibrations in his meditations. So, he experienced a part of this harmony and expressed it with his words. A question came, what about karma? How karma is related with what you say so far? Karma is another word we need to redefine. All the experiences we had so far created consequences because of the cause and effect mechanism. But it does not mean that we will live these consequences always literally, it is not like eye for an eye. And if we are working in the direction of development, our acts will start consequences in the positive way. So, let's take this word as the accumulation of what we did so far in this direction, and why we think negative results when we hear this word. We can take it as positive as well. As Dharma. Let's always concentrate on the positive. For example, one of our friends had wrote a comment in German, saying that this man, that is, me, is talking non-stop. Actually, this criticism pleased me. I said to myself, Bilgehan, it means you are able to tell what you want to say. Of course, I could be offended by this. If I were too emotional and touchy, this would take my mood down. But I am not, and I prefer to look at things from a positive perspective. And how I understood that comment written in German. I spent time to translate it into Turkish. So, dear friend, we understand you even if you write in German. Yes, such things happen when we are interactive during these videos.
Well, time flew again. We couldn't answer all the questions from you, but time to time, we can repeat such Q&A sessions. Such a nice interaction with our friends.
Yes, we replied to this question about Mansur al-Hallaj. But let me say a few things more. Of course, people like Mansur al-Hallaj are human beings who could glimpse into the divine order. But what about us? We talk about unitary, but did we see it? Did we feel it? Did we touch it? Is there such a possibility? We read it in this book and learn about it, but human beings like Mansur al-Hallaj had felt it or become aware of this, but they couldn't express it clearly. The language is insufficient, muscles of the tongue are insufficient, and after some point, such people doesn't want to express it anymore, but the only things that has been said at that moment remain. Actually, the radiance or illumination they felt or sensed is the radiance of light of their own being's radiance, the light of that subtle matter, and even that glimpse into it triggers such an explosion in the senses of the human body that they can only utter some words to describe this.
Another question: how can we take our vibrations higher? Well, here, the most important thing is to be more conscientious, doing all of our actions in the best possible way, to be more observant about how we talk, how we feel, how we think, and also, to work on our inner world. And as we had said at the beginning of this video, during this pandemic, we had many opportunities to do this. Such an inner work allows us to go within and to face whatever we kept hidden from ourselves, and by taking these hidden parts to the light of our consciousness, we begin to become more whole, more integrated. And whatever suits you, please use that method for your inner work. In the divine order and the universe, we read that prayers may be reflected up above, to a certain distance. The length of these distances depends on the sincerity, rightness, and degree of intensity of the wishes the prayers offer above while praying. Praying in accordance with your faith, meditating, practicing mindfulness, eating more nourishing foods, etc. Whatever suits you in that direction, but above all else, please be vigilant about how you feed your minds. We had discussed this topic in our previous videos. How do we feed our minds with the TV shows we watch, with the music we listen, with the conversations we have with others and ourselves, with the books we read, with the ideas and thoughts we are occupied with? All of these influences are vibrational levels. Try to be discerning about the things you feed your mind and body with. Try building some filters and healthy borders for yourself for not to take everything in. Yes, another question came: is there no coincidence in life?
We see that there is nothing arbitrary in life, when we read this book. Yet, I think we need to improve our understanding about coincidences. There are possibilities, yes, and the possibilities of matter is so useful for the beings and the spiritual system, and imagine the gigantic organization of maintaining all those possibilities ever ready to be manifested at the most suitable time, be it in the superficial time of our three-dimensional universe or of the spherical time of the beings. And the coincidences we experience in our lives are not the results of the cause and effect chains that started eons ago. On the contrary, events that appear like coincidence to us manifest in accordance with the most probable possibility convergence, that instantly gets triggered and put in action on both ends, from the minuscule incidents we see as a coincidence to the uppermost parts of the whole system. Just consider this virus. Just one virus triggered a vast chain of events in the global scale, and not only us humans but also all the animals and plants received their lot of development during this pandemic. And this was not because of coincidence. This did not happen arbitrarily. If we can think in terms of the levels we detected so far, how a motion begins in the wave form in an electron and becomes this form of solid table, then we can say that this vast mechanism of influence organizations start things in accordance with the most probable possibilities. The possibilities that have most motion to be manifested at a given time. So, this virus was a possibility in the wave form. It has the potential but not the chance. And this potential was the end result of what we did or did not in the world until that moment. This end result appeared as a probability, and in the light of the knowledge of beings in the higher plans, this most probable potential manifested as an event in life.
A comment came: I remember that the evolution progress forward with each incarnation, that is, a being governed a human brain cell cannot be a plant in its next incarnation. Do we advance with each incarnation? Do our senses perceive more with each incarnation? When we look at the stages of a being's development, we this progress. In this reading and commentary series, we read the book starting from the first page, so in our following videos, together we will read these stages in detail. And we already mentioned this progress in our previous videos with some slides. When a being is developed enough to govern a brain cell, to join the organizations of the brain and the nervous system of a human being, to become able to form, deform and transform matter in that level, then it does not need to be in the plant stage anymore. After all, the knowledge it gleaned in the plant stage is already with it. However, we had mentioned that a human being incarnates around 500 to 700 times during the stage of human, but it does not mean that each incarnation carries us to the next level up. Because of the egoistical choices made during many lifetimes, we may need to work on those past mistakes as well. Let's say I was a good healer in one of those lifetimes, but in the next incarnation, I made some egoistical choices and used this power of healing in the wrong way. It does not mean that I went backward. It may be that I experienced a much harder way of making choices, and if I learnt about my weaknesses because of this, good for me. Even in one life, we find ourselves in the opposite ends of that pendulum. Again, let me say that we cannot tell a human being's level of development by looking at the events and experiences that person goes through. However, the conscientious choices that person makes while or after going through these events and experiences contribute to the development of the being. As to the development of our senses. If our friend meant by this the development of psychic abilities or heightened perception of our five senses, this may not be related with the development of the being. The development we talk about is the widening of comprehension. For example, Uri Geller, the spoon bender of the 70s. He has this ability of influence over matter, but this does not mean that his personality is advanced or he is a conscientious person. And if you read his biography, you will see that he had many times lost his footing in life. But we can say that with each incarnation we learn more about utilizing and organizing matter organizations. In that sense, we advance. Well, it is 10 p.m. already.
I have talked non-stop. But still, I have a few more things to say. We kindly ask from our friends to read the pages we commented on so far in this series. We talk and comment on this book because, believe it or not, every day and night we read and try to understand it better so we can explain things with better examples in our personal lives, and later, we go over our notes together to complete the parts we missed or underexplained. We are not smart or intelligent. We are only persistent. Honestly, most of you may be smarter and more intelligent than us, but if you say that you don't get this or that while reading this book, it is either because you are just started or you don't persist. Because this is not about the intelligence. If you read this book by opening your mind and heart, by opening your perception and intuition, you will easily understand it. In this world we live in, knowledge is the fastest way of acquiring subtle matter. As you learn and study, you let your organism to be in tune with this subtle language of the knowledge. So, ask to understand and learn, may the knowledge be your New Year gift. Just do your best. We try to do our best. In 2021, there will be other commenters joining Tülin in this series. Still, we will be doing this work on this book, together.
So far into this reading and commentary series, we worked together, we thought and discussed together, and we had a nice harmony together. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me as a commentator for this series. Even if we were not face to face with our friends, we worked with them heart to heart. So, I greet all of them sincerely.
Yes, as we widen our capacity of comprehending, as we become more aware of the mechanisms at the background of the events in our lives, this makes us freer from the concerns and fears. Yes, it is so easy to be swept by the anxieties and fears, but as our comprehension widens, such automatic behavior gets weakened. And here, our aim is to break out this automatism, and doing this together with all of you makes it easier, makes it enjoyable. In this sense, let me thank you all for joining us, accompanying us in this series and contributing our expressions as reflections by your thoughts, feelings, emotions, and presence. And also let me express my heartfelt thanks to the Divine System, to Dr. Bedri Ruhselman, and to the medium of these spiritual communiqués, in short, to all who worked hard on making this book manifest as a gift to mankind. Yes, we wish you all a happy and productive new year. Hoping to see you all next year.
May your new year be full of transformation.